Well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Here we are at the beginning of Numbers, which I'm actually not usually very excited about. I think Numbers is harder than Leviticus, which I realize is kind of an unpopular opinion. But that's okay. But I'm excited because I got a new commentary for Christmas, and so I'm finally getting to dig into it. So it's really fun. But we're actually going to start in 1 Corinthians. The only logical place to start Numbers, right? 1 Corinthians 10. And I'll tell you why I want to start here after I read it. But so I'm gonna read a good chunk. I'm gonna read 1 through 13, and then we'll flip back to the portion of our week. All right, 1 Corinthians 10, starting in verse 1. For I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. They were all immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they were drinking from a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Messiah. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the desert. Now these things happened as examples for us, so we wouldn't crave evil things just as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And let's not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. And let's not test the Lord, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents. And let's not grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroying angel. Now these things happened to them as an example, and it was written down as a warning to us, on whom the ends of the age have come. Therefore let the one who thinks that he stands watch out that he doesn't fall. No temptation has taken hold of you except what is common to mankind. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can handle, but with the temptation he will also provide a way of escape so you will be able to endure it. So, what's maybe kind of fun and interesting about this passage is it kind of gives us a little bit of a summary of Numbers, of some of the maybe less than exciting or less than positive aspects, but it gives us a lesson. So this is a good example of showing, Paul is writing this letter, and it gives us how he kind of views this. And he's giving this warning, right? And in Corinth, so his letters to the Corinthians are often very, very much full of warnings because they are a people they are believers surrounded by lots of pagan people and traditions and things like that. So there's a lot of warning, and so he's using Torah and the Numbers as an example and a warning because they would know this story. Sandy, there's a handout on that back table if you want to grab one. So this is his view a little bit, and what I really like and what I want to bring out to start with, because we're going to talk a little bit about the book of Numbers, sort of as a whole, some of its themes and things like that, and kind of how we should look at it maybe as we go through, and then we'll get into the portion itself. But in verse 11, now these things happened as an example and was written down as a warning to us. And so it's very much this example that we are meant to learn from the past, right? We are meant to learn from what has happened before. So I was telling some of them before we started, I got a new commentary on Numbers for Christmas, and it's by L. Michael Morales, who wrote my favorite commentary on Leviticus. So, and I actually also have his book, which is much shorter, on Exodus. So I guess I'm just accumulating books by this author. I like his perspective. I like how he writes. So I guess I'm drawn to them right now. But he had some very interesting introductory remarks to the book of Numbers, and so I pulled a few things out of them. So the first one, which is why we started in 1 Corinthians 10, this is how he looks at Numbers. Numbers is both compass and map for the journey, revealing both the glory of Adonai and the nature of humanity. these things were written for our instruction or as a warning, wrote Paul in Israel's wilderness experience. That was in this chapter that we just read. That we might learn the strength of Adonai's arm, the absolute nature of his holiness, and the tenderness of his boundless mercies, that we might forsake unbelief and grumbling and follow him with simple dependence and songs of gladness. So, the reason, and so I like this perspective, and it helps me be a little bit more positive, because sometimes I look at Numbers, it's like we've just come out of Leviticus, which is this very much this ideal. This is how you live, so God can dwell in your midst, and it's very much this kind of idealistic society. And then we get into Numbers, and we realize that humans are not ideal at following the Lord all the time. And so I always am just a little bit like where idealism meets reality is a little bit challenging sometimes to see the clash. But I appreciate what this is saying about how we see the character of the Lord. And it's very much the Numbers journey through the wilderness is very much this journey that the Lord is really making them into this kind of covenant community, which is the language that Morales uses kind of throughout, is that they're becoming this covenant community. So we're really actually seeing kind of the outworking of how this covenant really works in reality. Again, knowing what kind of the ideal and the instruction is from Leviticus to the reality of how that is working out, and the victories and failures that come along with that. So the wilderness is really more than just a place, but it's a time and a mode of being. And there's this perspective that it displays this longing for home. It displays this desire for everything to be right, so to speak. And this longing for home is not really looking back to where they came from, even though we know that they've been trying to go back to Egypt. But it's this longing for something greater, right? And it's like this, is it C.S. Lewis that has the quote that I'm probably going to butcher, that it's like the fact that we have this longing for something else means that we're created for more than this world. Is that C.S. Lewis? Or is it? Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, I like Lewis and Tolkien quotes, I'm like, which one? And so I kind of think this is like displaying it, and it's this, and ultimately this longing and this wilderness journey doesn't fully end until we arrive at the new heavens, new earth with Messiah reigning. But this is a very important part of that journey and this wilderness experience. So another thing that I love, and this perspective was really interesting to me, is that the tabernacle is still very important, and you might all know that I kind of like the tabernacle at this point. But the tabernacle kind of takes on we see the tabernacle in a new role, because really a lot of what we're seeing with the tabernacle in Numbers is that it's kind of the mechanism, really the pillar of cloud and fire, but the tabernacle as an extension of that, of this leading and guiding the nation, right? They don't move until the cloud moves. And a lot of even what we're going to get into with today's portion is about how that happens and the order in which that happens and who's responsible for what. So the tabernacle kind of takes on this guiding principle where it's this dwelling place of God. So in Exodus, at the end of Exodus, we have the construction of it. We see Moses' role as a mediator between God and the people. But then at the end of Exodus, he actually can't even enter the tabernacle because the weight of the glory is so huge. And then we move into Leviticus, and we get all these instructions about how they need to live and what, the sacrificial system and all of these things that need to happen for God to dwell in the midst of the people. And now we see the tabernacle as the structure or the leader or the guide for where they're to go while they're in the wilderness. So it's an interesting, it's a little bit of a different perspective on the tabernacle and its role. I don't always think of it that way. I always think of it very much as this dwelling place of God, but thinking of it as almost this guidepost, this leader, which of course is the presence of God that's leading them. I thought was a really interesting perspective about how the role that the tabernacle plays, particularly within the book of Numbers. So when we look at the beginning, at the structure of the book of Numbers, chapters kind of 1 through 10 are very much seen as this kind of like ordering and this setup. So the kind of common theme to see is that chapters 1 through 10 are like creating this order within the camp. And then 11 through 25 are kind of chaos and dissension. And then 26 through 36 is a new beginning, because that's where we have the second census. The new census is beginning, and we start to see the next generation coming up. And so that's kind of our progression on a very broad scale of the book of Numbers. And again, like I said, I got this new commentary, so I'm excited about it. But this might be like the last quote I have from it. But
say that one more time.
Do what?
Say that one more
Yeah,
time.
the structure of it. Yeah, sorry. I did do that really fast. Okay, so chapters 1 through 10 are like order within the camp. 11 through 25 is this like chaos and dissension. They complain about food. Aaron and Miriam are criticizing Moses, all of that. And then 26...
11 through 25.
11 through 25, yes. And then 26 through 36 is kind of this new beginning, kind of starting to introduce the next generation. We have the second census. So it's kind of like this transfer of generation a little bit. So today we're only going to talk about 1 through like 3 and half of 4 is this week's portion. But looking at the first section as a whole of 1 through 10, so Morales talks about the camp of Israel being like really being kind of the central figure, of course. And it's this covenant community, like I mentioned, and it's recognizes the organizing principle of Numbers 1 through 10. So he actually calls the camp the protagonist of this narrative. Numbers 1 through 6 is talking about the arrangement of the camp and concludes with the priestly benediction, and then 7 through 10 concerns the mobility of the camp, which concludes when Moses kind of gives this liturgical cry of "Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered," which is kind of what they, we're moving. That's their cry as they're moving out. So that's happening as the uplifted ark marches out, leading the tribes. So this is kind of the order and structure, this vision of God's people and how they're to live. So let's see here. Okay, so last kind of final thought before we actually jump into the portion itself. I have a few more thoughts about Numbers. So we talked about how, Leviticus is kind of this ideal and Numbers is this realism. So the Torah story, which is another, I don't know that I would call it a commentary, maybe more of a textbook on Torah is the better way to say it, talks about Numbers, about these 3 principles of Numbers. So I'll read this quote, and then we can move into the portion. It says, "First, the range of Adonai's character is revealed within the story. He dwells among the people, and we quickly become aware that there are certain things required of people for this to be possible. Second, the character of the people is defined by the incurable addiction to sinfulness. The story of the second generation is remarkable and telling. They had never known any life except the wilderness, constantly sustained by the provision of Adonai. They were after the kind of their parents, however, and emulated their faithless rebellion. Third, Numbers explains something about the wilderness or the external world. The wilderness narrative demonstrates that the problem was never really from the wilderness, that is, from outside the people. Every time the people faced their ordeals, Adonai provided. Their problem, which Deuteronomy also tells us, was never physical. They had bread and everything else they needed. The real problem was failing to embrace God's word. So I kind of like that kind of summarizes what we've been saying about this, is that the wilderness kind of exposes right? It shows us God's faithfulness, but it also shows us kind of the tendencies and the heart of humanity. And most importantly, probably, is where those two intersect. The faithfulness of God and the sinfulness or the rebellion of humanity come together. And we see that God is faithful, even though we certainly see some intense consequences as we go through the book of Numbers and some of their rebellions, especially later on in the book. But we also see God's faithfulness, and we see that his promises to the people of Israel are never canceled or removed, even though maybe the timeline stretches out a little bit because the first generation then is not going to be allowed to enter the land, but the second generation is. So the plans of God cannot be canceled by the sinfulness of humanity, while at the same time he deals with sin in a serious way. So it's interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, before we actually jump into the portion, any other thoughts, any other perspectives on Numbers or how we go to this? Yeah?
Not a thought. I don't have many of those. Question, God's cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it takes a while to pack this spread up
Right.
and move. So does it say anywhere when the cloud tells them it's time to go, do you think it just heads off in that direction and expects them to follow, or do you think he hovers around until they get ready to actually move out?
That's a good question, and I thought about that. And to my knowledge, it doesn't specifically say how that happens. It gives us all the instruction for, the order that they're to pack things and who's supposed to do what and the order that they move. But it doesn't give us the, when God decided to move, the cloud went right here and waited for them to pack up and be ready and then moved. But I'm assuming there has to be enough time. If he's giving them such instruction about how they're supposed to pack up and move, they have to have time to do that.
Yes.
So I don't know what the signal was. I don't know if all of a sudden the cloud just starts ever so slowly shifting from the center. I don't know. I don't know if Moses gets some
Heads up. Well, he
some insight. He must
interacts
have.
with God
Right.
a lot.
Moses probably gets some insight, but it doesn't tell us specifically, which is very interesting. But they have to have time to move. So it's not and it doesn't seem so it's either moving slow enough or they somehow get a warning or a heads up that it's time to pack. And they really don't, and they actually spend most of their time, I forget the exact timelines of it, but they actually spend the majority of their wilderness time in one place. And then they move a bunch of times. Or do they move a bunch of times and then stay? Now I can't remember. Anyway, there's a timeline. But they do spend a lot of time in one spot for the most part. And then they'll move around some. So it's not like they're moving every day.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, I think that's also an interesting question, and I don't really have an answer. We don't know exactly what that was like, but somehow they knew when it was time to pack, which is good.
Well, I noticed text in Numbers 9:15 or 16, it talks about the cloud lifting. The Hebrew word is just it's the same word for aliyah, the word to go up.
Mm-hmm.
So I would assume if it begins to ascend, that's kind of like the key.
Yeah.
And I'm sure when the people were ready, the thing would begin moving forward. That's how I would imagine that it probably happened.
Yeah.
Because it does use that word to go up.
Yeah.
As
So
opposed
maybe
to go forward.
Right.
Go
Yeah.
up
So
is-
maybe it just they can see it going up and not being connected with so much a pillar as a cloud.
Right.
I think that's possible. But yeah, we don't have all the logistics. Yeah.
Just a comment.
Sure.
That wilderness seasons are very real in the life of the
For
believer.
sure.
And I think we don't, at least personally, I didn't realize they even existed until I was in one.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way you're gonna come out unless the Lord brings you out.
Right.
And just last week, there's a scripture I recently shared with somebody, which is, who is this coming up out of the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved?
Yeah.
Because that's the key to the whole thing, to learn to trust the Lord.
Right.
Truly.
Yeah, and I think And even, we even see Yeshua having a wilderness season, right? He goes out into the wilderness for 40 days and is tempted. And, I think I always think of these wilderness seasons, both in Numbers and in our, the seasons that we have, in our lives, as they are those very exposing seasons. They expose what's in our hearts. They expose our desires. They expose how we think about the Lord, because I think that's one of the things that's happening here. And of course, the wilderness here, like he's still there's part of the wilderness experience in Numbers that he's still working to kind of shift their identity and their way of thinking out of this slavery mentality, right? Which I think for us is also right. We all have a moment, whether we were very young or not as young, when we came to know Yeshua, or even if we did come to know him as young, and whatever, all kinds of stories. But we all have something in our lives that we kind of have to unlearn, I think, that's not in line with the kingdom, to then align with the kingdom. And I think wilderness seasons are a lot of times when that can happen. Yeah.
I watched the video this week about the rebuilding of Wrigley Field in Chicago where the Cubs play. And they kind of described it like rebuilding a plane as it's being flown. They never did shut it down. They just continued to, and they would dig and find the vertical steel members on the pier and find that the concrete pier was deteriorating. So they need to, drill down the bedrock and rebuild it all. They never did. They said they thought if they did shut it down for a year and play someplace else, it would have been 2016. And that's the year the Cubs broke the curse and won the World Series. So that would have been terrible to have won the World Series in a different stadium. So it's kind of like, I kind of thought of it kind of like my life. I continue to live my life, but these different parts of me are being changed and repurposed and hopefully glorified and rebuilt. And so we continue to live our lives in circumstances. I even thought of that plane analogy, I'm flying the plane, Yeshua is my navigator, I see clouds, storm clouds ahead, I want to fly away from it. He says, no, you're going to fly through it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's good. That's really interesting. I think that's a good, and it also makes me think of this idea of working out your salvation with fear and trembling, right? It's our salvation isn't just we make it, we commit our lives to the Lord and then we're done. It's this ongoing process, because there's this ongoing refining and this ongoing, purifying, and this ongoing, we continue revelation that we continue to. The more that we walk with the Lord, the more we continue to understand Him. Not that we ever fully can, but something the Lord has said to me before is He's like, you can have as much of me as you want, which we as finite human beings don't ever have the capacity for all of it. But He wants us to know more of Him. And so I think our journey with the Lord is meant to always be discovery. That's one of the things I always say. That's what I love about studying the Bible, is I know I can spend my whole life studying the Bible and I'm never going to run. I'm never going to get bored. There's always another commentary. There's languages I can learn. There's different perspectives. There's all these things. I can spend my whole life studying the Bible and never learn it all. And I love that. I think that that's so fun, actually. So yeah, I think it's this relational aspect of there are even moments, there are times when I read passages and I think about I was once taught, something completely different than what I now understand. And I feel the grace of the Lord in that too. It's He knows that we're on a journey. And so I don't think that obviously if we recognize that we've had error at some point, we need to repent for that and, do whatever we need to do to reconcile or whatever. But he has a lot of grace and mercy for the journey, which is something I think that we also see in Numbers, even though, because we need consequences to correct us too, right? We talk about the parent-child dynamics a lot, but it's right? You can't, good parents don't raise their children just do whatever you want. You give appropriate boundaries and consequences, and I think the Lord is actually doing that with the people of Israel as well. Which is something I think it's really fun to see, even though when it's really hard. But like we read in 1 Corinthians at the beginning, we're meant to read these and take warning and be warned by them. But we're meant to learn from the rebellions and the mistakes and the consequences that Israel experiences in these narratives, and they're supposed to inform our own lives. So, all right, let's jump into the portion. So fascinating. So we start out, of course, with a census. And so we'll kind of, this handout that I have for you is just to give you a visual of what this kind of would look like. Now, there's a couple things about it that some diagrams would show a little bit differently. Like sometimes they show Judah like in the middle, and I'm like, I don't know, you know. I don't get hung up on some things like that, but this is a good enough example to show you, to give you a visual of what this would look like. And then you can imagine, I think, I mean, what I like about it and what makes sense to me about Judah being over here, it would work if the tribe of Judah was in the middle too, but is that as they're heading out, you know, they kind of just fall in line. So Judah would go, and then so like they would just all go around this way, right? And of course the Levites would all go first, but I think that sometimes it's nice to have a visual of what that would look like. So we can refer back to that as we go, but it does have the numbers from the census on here. I'm not going to read all of the numbers, but we find out that they are to take a census of every man 20 years and older who's available to serve in the army of Israel. So this is one of the purposes of the census, is to know who their army can be, right? Because we know that their quest to the promised land is not without opposition. So they do need to have an army. So we learn from that, from the census, that by the time they're all counted, in chapter 1, verse 46, all those who were counted totaled 603,550. And of course, those are all the tribes except for the Levites. So then we get into the Levites a little bit. And I'm going to read this little section because I like it. So this is 147 to the end. So the Levites, however, were not counted by the tribe of their ancestors. For Adonai told Moses, saying, "Definitely you are not to number the tribe of Levi, nor take the sum of them among Bnei Israel. Instead, you are to appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its implements and all pertaining to it. They are to carry the tabernacle and all its utensils, tend to it, and camp around it. Whenever the tabernacle sets out, the Levites are to dismantle it, and whenever the tabernacle is pitched, the Levites are to set it up. But the commoner who comes near to it must be put to death. Bnei Israel will encamp, each man with his own camp, each with his own standard according to their own divisions. The Levites are to camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, so that there will be no wrath unleashed on the community of Bnei Israel. So the Levites are to maintain care of the tabernacle of testimony. So Bnei Israel did all that Adonai commanded Moses, so they did." Okay. So that's where we get, and then it's going to get into chapter 2, where it's going to tell us which tribes camp on which side, which is where this diagram comes from. And you can see that it has some of the verses for, though it seems like maybe now that I'm looking at it closely, there might be some typos in it. But anyway, this was a quick search. Yeah.
Are the Gershonites and the Kohatites and the Merarites, are they all Levites?
Yes, they are, and we'll get into that in a minute. It explains all of them in a second. That's where we're headed, and I love it.
It's interesting because he says don't number them, and then
right, but it does number them.
Number them. Yeah. Well, he commands that they be numbered. You know,
well, but they're not numbered in the same numbering, so they're not
right,
numbered
not
for
the army.
Yeah, they're not numbered in the army.
They're the spiritual army.
Yes, yes. So they're not. It's a different numbering reason.
Right.
Does somebody want to grab Lucy? There's a handout back there. Does somebody want to grab one for her? You're welcome. Sorry, I didn't catch you before you got over there. Thank you. So what am I saying? Okay, so different numberings, which we'll get into the Levites in just a minute. But, well, we'll get into the numbering and the positioning of the Levites in a minute. So we find out that, like the Levites are not counted among the census of the army because they have these specific roles that they're to play with the tabernacle and moving the tabernacle and, dealing with all the things, everything that is part of that process. And I think it's interesting, they're to camp around the tabernacle of the testimony so that there will be no wrath unleashed. And I have a note in here that I must have looked this up at one point, that this no wrath is kind of is talking about like the foaming at the mouth kind of wrath of the Lord. So they have this very important role as kind of watchmen and gatekeepers of the tabernacle itself. So they're not fighting the army, but they are keeping the wrath of God away from the people. So it seems as though the task it's not like they're escaping all responsibility and duty. So they're to maintain the care of that. So then we move into, and I'm not going to go through all the details. It's on this. This is what this diagram is showing you in chapter 2 is this ordering. Because remember, we talked about this is what this early section of Numbers is very much about order. So it's giving kind of this pattern for how they are to live and camp and where the order that they're to be set up. And Judah always goes first as the camp moves, which if you remember some of Tom's teachings on the Jew first is the Judah first principle. Judah, the name of Judah is where we get the term Jew. And so the Jew first principle arises out of this Judah first principle. So Tom has some extensive teachings on that, but it's important to keep in mind and to notice as you go through the rest of Scripture how that plays out. And ultimately, we know that Yeshua comes from the line of Judah, so, and the line of David, which is the line of Judah. So that is significant. Okay, so then we get into the Levites, and this is what I really like in chapter 3. I think this is super fun. So chapter 3, verse 1, these are the generations of Aaron and Moses, current at the time Adonai spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. These are the names of Aaron's sons: Nadab the firstborn, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the anointed Kohanim, whom he consecrated to be priests. But Nadab and Abihu died before Adonai for offering unauthorized fire before Adonai in the Sinai wilderness, and they had no children. So Eleazar and Ithamar served as Kohanim under Aaron their father. So we have this kind of summary, this record of what has happened and how the Kohanim and the line is transferring since we have the death of two of Aaron's sons for offering this unauthorized fire. All right, so we're going to read in the next section. Sorry, go ahead.
The two that offered up the strange fire, or unauthorized fire, do you think they knew what they were doing?
Yes.
Then why did they do it?
Why do humans do anything they know they're not supposed to do?
Well,
Why was it fires?
Why was it unauthorized fire?
So there's a lot of speculation about exactly what this is, but what we know from the text is that it's an offering that was not specifically commanded by God. So it's, I guess, sort of possible, but probably pretty unlikely that they were like, okay, so we're going to bring something even better than what he wants, and we're going to earn more favor for this. So which is still kind of a selfish motivation, but it's possible that they were like, well, if God wants this, then this is even better, so we're going to bring that instead. Because God instructed very specific sacrifices. He instructed very specific incense and fire to be brought into the holy place. And so whatever it was, we don't have the specifics of it, it was different than what he commanded.
right.
So So that's why. So some translations say strange fire. Some say unauthorized. So there's another one that I think some of them say. I can't remember right now. But basically, yeah, it was not. God said exactly what He wanted, and it wasn't open to interpretation. And they brought something different than that. And so God, the punishment for that was that they were killed. And Aaron was not even allowed to mourn them, which is challenging and sad and extreme. But it's to make this like God is only allowing certain things to come into His dwelling place, and they brought something different than that. So we don't know the specifics of exactly what it is or what their intent was behind it, but we know that it wasn't what God commanded. And so for that reason, they had to receive the consequences.
Yeah, so God usually would have them like bring a lamb or a bull or things like that.
Yeah.
Maybe they brought a swine or something. I don't know.
So it says, let's see. Okay, so this is like, so what's happening is like, it seems like based on what they're talking about with incense, which the incense altar is in the most holy place. So like on this diagram, it's what's labeled the most holy place. So that's where the altar of incense, the golden menorah, and the table of showbread were. So certain priests, and really only, they were in the line of the high priest. So anyway, only the high priestly line could bring offerings into that section. But there was a certain incense and a certain way that they were supposed to bring that in there, and they brought something different because it says that it's from Leviticus 10. They took their own censer, put fire in it, and laid incense over it, and offered unauthorized fire, which He had not commanded them. So they took a different incense, a different censer, a different something, and took it into the holy place, and that's not what God said. So they were killed. So this is actually not specifically about like the sacrificial system as far as like the animals. This is more about bringing something into the holy place, into the inner court. That is not what because there was a specific blend of incense that they only used in the tabernacle in the temple. So they were not supposed to bring anything else, and they weren't supposed to use that incense anywhere else either. Yeah?
Yeah, just had a quick comment on that. So, like, after they were struck dead, just like out of the blue, God He gives a command.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like what He was saying seems to be linked, like directly following the death. And it was not to drink. So it's not to have strong drink amongst
Mm-hmm.
the priesthood when they go into the tabernacle. And so there are not a few commentators that feel there's a connection there. That basically this is a big celebration day.
Yeah.
Like they may have been drinking. It messed up their judgment in
Right.
terms of what they should have been doing,
Yeah.
and then they got crisped. So I'm not saying sure, but that's a real. It's in the commentary.
Yeah, it is a connection that many bring, and I think it's possible. I think we don't, from the text, we can't say for certain. But
it seems odd though that he would say that like if it didn't have a connection, it just seems odd. Well, why that one commandment, and why right immediately after they're carrying the bodies out, God speaks? And I don't know, it's just interesting that the timing of it is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very possible. And this is also connected with even though it's a few chapters later, this event is connected with the significance of the cleansing of the tabernacle in Leviticus 16 with the Day of Atonement. Because basically the holy place has been defiled by something that was not authorized coming into it. And so then, and of course there's more to Yom Kippur than that, but the fact that we get the instruction for Yom Kippur and the cleansing of the tabernacle on the heels of this kind of desecration of it is also significant.
Do you
as
think
well.
that defiled also by the dead bodies, possibly?
Well, yeah, because there's not supposed to be death in there, which gets into a whole thing of the impurity of those who had to remove it and all, it's and on and on. So there's a lot of pieces to that, for sure. Okay, so jumping back into Numbers 3, so we have this, so we know that, of course, the first two sons of Aaron died in this event that we were just talking about, and so the other 2 sons are going to take on this line of serving as priests under Aaron. Okay, so I'm going to pick up in verse 5. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Gather the tribe of Levi near and appoint them to attend to Aaron the Cohen. They are to keep watch over duties for him and the entire community before the tent of meeting, while performing the service of the tabernacle. They are to tend to all of the implements of the tent of meeting and the service of Bnei Israel, while performing the services of the tabernacle. You are to give the Levites to Aaron and his sons. Out of Bnei Israel, they are dedicated entirely to him. You are to appoint Aaron and his sons to maintain the priesthood. Any commoner who approaches must be executed." So, this is serious stuff, right? But again, we've mentioned this before, but I always like to bring it up because I know our brains like to create hierarchies. And so we can read this and say, well, Aaron is the best, and his sons are the next best, the Levites are the next best, and then everybody else is just nothing. And that is not what this is saying, right? This is just saying that different people have different roles, right? So this particular tribe and these particular people have specific instructions, and it is for those people specifically. It's not, it's not a volunteer system. It's not an election system. Which that's something that Dennis Prager points out in his commentaries is that, God very much, so what we're reading about is how a theocracy is set up, right? Which is that God is the head of the people and everybody else is kind of in their roles kind of under and serving him, right? They don't have an elected leader. They don't have a king yet. And we'll find out later the problems that are going to come with kings. But that's a discussion for another day. But we know that there are these specific roles, but that God is at the head of all of it. And it's not democratic. And Dennis Prager in his commentaries makes this comment that if religion were democratic, right and wrong would be determined by people rather than by God. So there is this sense of, we can have all these speculations and they're fascinating conversations. I'm not saying we don't have them of why did God choose this and why did God decide to set things up like this and why did he choose them and not them? We can, but and sometimes there are reasons. And sometimes it's because that's how God decided to do it. And he has logic and understanding that we don't. And so there are times when our faith has to kick in and just say, we trust that God knows what he's doing. We can't explain everything about him. Okay, so moving on. Okay, we're just going to keep going because I like all these things so much. Okay, so verse 11. Then Adonai said to Moses, saying, "See, I have taken the Levites from among Bnei Israel in place of the firstborn who open the womb of Bnei Israel. The Levites will be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. In the day when I was striking down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated to myself every firstborn in Israel, whether man or animal, as mine. I am Adonai." So this is going back to this principle of the firstborn, which actually maybe we'll skip over there and we'll talk about this. Towards the end of Numbers 3, we have some more this redemption of the firstborn passage. So maybe we'll go out a little bit out of order and we'll jump over there for a minute. But basically, the Levites are seen as this kind of serving the Lord as this firstborn status, which in some sense is a picture within Israel of also Israel and the nations, right? So Israel as a whole is this firstborn nation, and then all the rest of us are, but we are also part of the family, right? We're also part of the children of God. We don't have the same specific roles as Israel and the Jewish people, but we are still part of the family, right? And we're all meant to be one family together. So even within Israel, we see this, where the Levites take on this firstborn within the firstborn. They have specific roles. They live their lives in a specific way that is a little bit set apart from the rest of Israel, but they're all still Israel, right? So it's interesting. We can see this kind of picture within a picture a little bit. So the firstborn is very important. So we're going to jump over to Numbers 3:40. And this is the redemption of the firstborn, which is a little bit of a different thing, but we're just going to stay on this firstborn topic for a minute. So Adonai said to Moses, count every firstborn male of Bnei Israel from 1 month old and upward, and make a list of their names. Set the Levites apart for me in place of all the firstborn of Bnei Israel, and all the livestock of the Levites in place of the firstborn of the livestock of Bnei Israel. I am Adonai. So Moses counted all the firstborn, and we find out that the list is 22,273. So then verse 44, again, Moses spoke to Moses, saying, take the Levites in place of all the firstborn of Bnei Israel, and the livestock of the Levites in place of their livestock. The Levites will be mine. I am Adonai. To redeem the 273 firstborn of Israel, exceeding the number of the Levites. So pause. So this is the part we skipped. We're going to go back to. So right before this in Numbers 3, they have numbered the Levites, and we find out that there's 22,000. So this is talking about there's 273 more firstborns in the rest of Israel than there are Levites. So they're talking about how do we reconcile these numbers. Okay, so to redeem the 273 firstborns of Bnei Israel, exceeding the number of the Levites, you are to collect 5 shekels for each, based on the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. Give the money of the redemption of the extra ones of the firstborn of them to Aaron and his sons. And so then they carry out that process. So this is a very interesting and very specific instruction, right? And it's like, because in some ways it's like, they're close. They're both in the 22,000 range, right? Close enough. Apparently not. So every life is important and every numbering is important. So again, it's bringing this this principle this firstborn principle into reality. And of course, this money goes to Aaron and his sons, which honestly they probably need because their entire life is working in the sanctuary. They're reliant on this whole process, the sanctuary process, this tabernacle process to live. And so honestly, them having a little bit of extra money is probably good. They probably need that. So because they're not working and making money in the ways that the rest of Israel would be. That's just my opinion, my thought process on that. So that's just me. That's how I kind of think about it. Okay, I'll pause. I've been saying a lot of things. So, any other thoughts on this redemption on this firstborn principle of the Levites, or this redemption of the firstborn? And again, this is meant to remind them back of Egypt, right? Because the final plague, right, is the firstborn of all of Egypt is killed, and those with the blood on their doors are spared. Sorry, you were going to say something.
What was the position of the second, third, and fourth, and whatever born? I mean, what status did they hold in particular, or did they?
I mean, so it's that. So in ancient, I don't know. Where do I want to go with this?
I don't know.
So I think that there's part of this, like this ancient understanding that the firstborn would get a greater inheritance than the rest. So I don't know that that's exactly what's playing out here, even though they're the ones given a specific role. So as far as like status of second, third, fourth, and so on, it's not so much a status thing as much as a distinction, I think I would say. I think that all of this stuff about the firstborn is making a point that there needs to be this group of people set apart for God, for the service to the Lord, for protecting the people from potential wrath of God, for all these things. And it doesn't mean that the rest of the people are less than, because again, remember that the Levites, the ones that are serving in the tabernacle, are dependent upon everyone else properly participating in this sacrificial system, and because the food that the Levites eat comes from some of the sacrifices. So without everybody else participating, they go hungry, if that makes sense. So in that sense, it's not necessarily a status thing. Like everybody has to fulfill their role. Everybody has to, and we don't see the specifics. Like it doesn't tell us, the tribe of Gad does this and the tribe of Reuben does this. We don't have they're not like lined out in the same way. But at the same time, if they don't participate in this process and in this structure, then the Levites' roles don't work either. Does that sort of make sense?
Well, the first example, but the only example I could think of that flies in the face of that is David.
Hmm. Because he's not a firstborn?
Right.
Well, God also likes to kind of, but Judah's not the firstborn either. Neither is
There you
Levi.
go.
Isaac, neither was.
There is-
There you go.
Right. So God likes to upset the order of things.
Yeah, I think there's an important thing here, because firstborn, it's not what many people think, the firstborn born. It's a position.
Right.
It's a position of status that can be lost, it can be traded, it can be stolen, it can be sold. Like Yeshua is called the firstborn from among the dead. So is that true? You see the firstborn raised from the dead in Scripture? No. Old Testament has examples of people being raised from the dead. He's the preeminent one that's been raised from the dead. So it's a status. But beyond that, I think it's hard to wrap. I have a hard time even wrapping my brain around the concept of firstborn, like how important it was to God. It's so different from just our society,
Yeah.
like how we
Yeah.
do life. It's just like, what does this even mean? 'Cause
Right.
You could tell because they're doing accounting here down to the last number. So obviously, it's really important.
Yeah.
But do I understand that? I'm having a hard time absorbing
Right.
the importance of it.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think kind of looking at it as a position is a good way to look at it, and I think that again, this would be something that would contrast other ancient societies where it kind of didn't matter the character or anything about the literal firstborn. They got twice the inheritance of second, third, fourth, and so on. Whereas God is reordering that. So if we were to go back to Genesis 49, when Jacob is about to die and he's giving blessings over all his sons, this is where we start to see some of this come out, because Judah is actually fourth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, because he even says, I'm just going to read a couple little snippets of this because we don't have time to unpack this entire thing, even though it's fascinating. Because Reuben is the firstborn, and Jacob's blessing to him is, Reuben, my firstborn are you, my vigor, and my firstborn of my power, endowed with extra dignity, endowed with extra strength, like water boiling over. You will not have extra. And this is because he defiled his father's family. So, and then we get into Simeon and Levi, who are brothers, and they are also not given the firstborn. And then we get to Judah. Judah, so you are, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on your enemy's neck, and your father's sons will bow down to you. And we continue to go on, and there's a lot of messianic prophetic language in this as we go on in this blessing of Judah. So we see Judah taking on the role or the position of the firstborn, and that continues on apparently forever. So like when we get to David, it becomes a similar thing. But we've also already seen it with Ishmael and Isaac, and with Jacob and Esau, where the second is given the role of the firstborn for different reasons. So it is more of this position, because again, the Levites are not the firstborn either. So they have this firstborn role, but they are not the firstborn. But they are the tribe that God has decided to give this responsibility to. So again, it comes to this, we have a hard time wrapping our minds around how God defines firstborn and how he makes some of his decisions on how he sets this up. And I think on some level, we do have to trust him a little bit, that he knows what he's doing when he makes those decisions. And we see how it plays out as we go, and that sometimes these people are not worthy of the roles that they're given, but God doesn't change the structure just because people make poor decisions, which is really hard for us too, because I think sometimes we want to be like, well, you screwed up, you are, dethroned, so to speak, but that's not how God works, and that is something that we have to wrestle with as well. Do you have something, Faith?
Yeah, I think it's a really important issue that we're just now, kind of just barely tapping in. There's so much that could be said, but kind of what based on what, is it David?
David.
David said, it's like God is actually after the heart.
Mhm.
And we can have a status, and you see like Esau despised his birthright. So
Right.
it's like there is an inheritance for every person, but we can obtain it or we can lose it based on our heart, the state of our heart. So David was chosen because God saw his heart,
Right.
even though logic would say this one, this one, this one, this one.
Yeah.
Um,
Which I do think, especially, and David is also then interwoven with the issue of the kings, right? Which God tells us that it would be better for Israel to never have a king. But he also goes, but when you insist on it, this is how you have to do it, right? But I think that sometimes, with David too, who was not perfect, but by God basically allowing him to be anointed as king, or calling him, however you want to phrase that, I think we still see the sovereignty of God in that. In that it's like, he knows Israel's going to want a king, and the kingly line is going to be from Judah, but it doesn't mean, right? And then we even see it with David's sons. Like, David's sons' firstborn does not end up being king either, right? And so it still is an issue of God, of the sovereignty of God, and him, and there's still, even though he's not going to remove that position from that line, it doesn't mean that it's a given that it goes exactly how we would line it out. Yeah.
So every time that I've been noticing when the Lord has called somebody their firstborn, it always seems to be associated with, because they're mine. And so he's marking that, kind of like the heart thing. He's marking them for a role, a position of service unto him, whether it's leading a nation, protecting his tabernacle, teaching his people. And then he goes even further on, where we see in the prophets, where he starts just referring to Israel, period, as mine. So we're going kind of like levels to levels, but it seems like that phrasing of firstborn is associated to a specific calling that the Lord's giving that person, that group, or that nation at that time.
Yeah.
And he's marking them. When
Yeah.
he says firstborn, I'm marking. So before it was like, oh yeah, the first one that came out of the womb, this is mine. But now he's kind of like, shift the system. Well, this group now is mine, because now I'm back down here in the midst of you. My tabernacle's here. You want me to dwell with you, and I need a group of people that will keep my sacred space sacred. And if any commoner or somebody unclean comes in, it is now the role of this group of people to put them to death. I mean, that's like to protect sacred space, to protect defiling. It's a pretty heavy role. It's not just, on one side you can sit there and think, well, it's like, oh, well, I get to be the one to put some, it wasn't, it was a safety thing. This is the group of people I'm marking. They don't get to have their own land. They don't get to do whatever. They're set apart as mine, and here's their roles, and these roles are set up to keep my presence in the midst of the people, and to keep the people from dying, because my presence is in the midst of them.
Right. Because imagine if the Levites didn't have this role. How fast do you think that the tabernacle would be defiled and the presence of God would have to leave?
Or how many people would die?
Or how many people would die? I mean, it would be like chaos, right? Yeah. Like order, like God is setting up order for the benefit of everyone. And even though we may not, especially in our modern, thousands of years later in our modern understanding, fully understand that and understand how exactly that works in this context, I think it's still really important. It's still showing like God actually is caring for them and loving them so much and extending his mercy in a way, in such a great way through this structure. So I think if we look through, which is kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, but I love some of this perspective on Numbers as this, as this display of God leading his people through his presence and the tabernacle, and it displays his character, and it you know, it's where like the holiness of God and his dwelling amidst the people and his mercy and his kindness and his judgment meet the imperfections of humanity. It's where this, like, we have this beautiful ideal of Leviticus. If we all just live like this, everything's great. And then humans happen always. And so humans are not perfect. And yet God is able to live in this tension of he's holy and he requires certain things to dwell in his people, and yet these people are always going to screw it up, and yet he doesn't break his covenant. He doesn't choose someone else. He doesn't say, all right, the Levites didn't work, send them out, bring in the tribe of Asher. Like, he doesn't do that. He works in the midst of the structure that he created in a covenantally faithful way. And I think that like the more that we try to grasp the sovereignty and kindness and mercy of God through how he does that, even when we see some of these extreme consequences and we see all these people die, is I think is kind of where some of the gold of Numbers can be. Because again, going back to where we started in 1 Corinthians 10, it's meant to be instructive to us. We're meant to be instructed by how they lived, learn about the character of God, and also learn from the mistakes of the people. So, but at the same time, I think there's also this, like the end of the passage that we read in 1 Corinthians 10 talks about that there will be temptations of every kind, but he also provides a way out. So he doesn't say, he's not saying, he's not necessarily even saying, you got yourselves into this mess, you get yourself out. He's saying that these things are real. You live in a world where there are real enemies, where there are real powers and principalities against you. There are real forces trying to make you do stupid stuff. And yet the Lord can help you find a way out. And through building relationship with him, I think we get better and better about not being drawn away by some of those things. Okay, we have like 5 minutes, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the families of the Levites, because I like it. So I'm not going to read all of this because I won't have time, so I'm going to summarize and read little sections. But what we see in the rest of chapter 3, so kind of from, so starting in verse 14, this is where actually God instructs Moses to count the sons of Levi. So the Levites have their own census. So the previous census, again, was about the military forces. This is about the Levites. So we have Aaron and his sons and Moses, because Moses and Aaron are brothers. And then we have these 3 other Levitical families. So we have Gershon, Kohath, and Merari and their families. And that's what you see on this diagram. You see, so the bottom would be to the east. So you have Moses and Aaron, his sons there, and then you have these other families around the tabernacle. Now, there are some who would depict them kind of being a little bit more intermixed with some of the tribes. I think because of the requirements as far as like ritual purity for the Levites, I think they would have to have a little bit of separation most likely, but that's maybe splitting hairs a little bit. Okay, but anyway, moving on. So then we get into, starting in verse 31 so 31 through 39 basically is kind of counting of each of these specific families and giving us some of the roles. So I'm just going to really fast go through what each of these families, is in charge of. So 325 tells us the duties of the sons of Gershon in the tent of meeting were the tabernacle, the tent, its coverings, the curtain of the entrance of the tent of meeting, the curtains of the courtyard, the screen of the entrance of the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar, its ropes, and all its related use. So they're kind of in charge of the bigger structures, curtains, tent part of the tent, so to speak. Kohath is responsible for kind of the some of the inner parts of the tabernacle. So they're responsible for, this is verse 31, they're responsible for the ark, the table, the menorah, the altars, and the implements of the sanctuary used in service with them, the curtain and all its involved use. So they are kind of in charge of kind of the curtains and the inner, so including the ark, so the holy place and the Holy of Holies. They're kind of in charge of all of those items and all of the accompanying accessories, so to speak. And then Merari, so down in verse 36, the sons of Merari were appointed over the care of the frames of the tabernacle, its crossbars, posts, bases, and all equipment for its use. The posts of the surrounding courtyard, their bases, pegs, and ropes. And then it goes on to tell us that toward the east is where Moses and Aaron and his sons are to camp, so right in front of the tabernacle itself, and they're to take care of everything there. And then we have what we mentioned earlier, that all the Levites are counted as 22,000. So actually Merari, they're kind of in the structural elements: poles, posts, crossbars, all those things. So everybody has their specific assignments, and so then really quickly in chapter 4. So then we get the instructions of how they are to prepare this to move. So these are Levites and their families from 30 to 50 years old, who are doing this work. So it gives us then this kind of instruction of how they're to kind of start packing all of this up. So, everything is to be covered in blue, a lot of times in blue cloth, wrapped carefully, placed on, they have poles that they install to be able to carry everything. So it's very specific on how they kind of pack all of this stuff up. And so Aaron and his sons are the ones who actually are covering everything. And then these other families kind of come and do, especially with the items in the holy place. Since not everybody can touch them, Aaron and his sons are covering, the ark and the menorah and all of these, the incense altar and all of these things, and packing them up. And then the sons of Kohath are to actually carry them, but not to touch them. So just at the very end of our portion in verse 17 of Numbers 4, it says, Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "You are not to let the families of the tribes of the Kohathites be cut off from among the Levites. Do this for them so that they may live and not die whenever they approach the most holy item. Aaron and his sons are to go into the sanctuary and assign each man his job and his responsibility, but the Kohathites are not to go in and look at what is holy, not even momentarily, or they will die." So the Kohathites will become very important later on. Stay tuned for the rest of Numbers. But remember that this instruction is here that they are not to die, and that in some sense it's the responsibility of Aaron and his sons to make sure that they are not not overstepping their responsibilities and not going beyond what they've been asked to do, but also they are not to be allowed to die out because their role is so important. So that was a lot of things, and there's a lot of structure happening here, but keep in mind as we go on, if you want, of course you're welcome to keep this handout as just kind of a visual as you go around. I think it's helpful to kind of get an idea of what this would look like. Because again, it is so different from what we're used to in our modern societies. But just imagining this camp and imagining how God is interacting with them through this order that he is establishing for them. And we'll continue on and see where they end up, which we already know where they end up, but we know the story, but we'll see what we learn about the character of God in the midst of his people and wilderness. So, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.